Okay, so hello again. You're all very welcome. My name is Kennedy. I am the Policy and Research Officer for the Psychological Society of Ireland, and we're here today to present to you our webinar presented by the Science of Public Policy Committee, Pathways to Studying Psychology at Undergraduate Level in Ireland. So again, as I said, the webinar is being recorded, and your faces will not appear in the recording. There will be time for questions, but if at any point you have a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat, throw it in the Q&A. In the Q&A function, there is an anonymous function if you wish to do so that way. And if you don't feel comfortable, or if you don't have time to answer the question during the presentation, so please feel free to email sppc@psychologicalsociety.ie, or you can respond to any of the emails I may have sent you the past week or so with the link to this webinar. So first of all, before we get into the presentation, so who is the PSI? So the Psychological Society of Ireland is a knowledge-led psychological membership body. So essentially, we are professional and learned body for psychologists in Ireland, operating since 1970. Our main role is to provide administration advocacy for our members and for psychology as a profession. And it's also a volunteer-based organization, which is really important. So everyone who works within the organization as psychologists are all giving their time at their own time. And membership, there are many different categories, but for this specific event, I will highlight that student membership, once you become a undergrad, master's, PhD, any level of student, is only €18 a year, so very accessible. And yeah, so the Science of Public Policy Committee is a PSI committee set up by PSI members to promote scientific and evidence-based psychological knowledge, inform public policy, and work to benefit our members and the wider public. And from this, I will introduce 3 members of our Science of Public Policy Committee to share a bit of their story in how they got into the field of psychology.
Thanks a million, Kennedy. So hi, everyone. I'm Nuala Whelan. I'm delighted to be here this evening, and this is our second webinar around routes to psychology, education and careers. So we held one last year also, which was really great. It was our first one to do, and we got a lot of positive feedback from it. So we're delighted to be here again this evening. I suppose my route into psychology, well, I went to college to be a teacher originally. I wanted to be an English and music teacher. So went off to UCD to study arts, and realized that I needed to take a third subject. So after traipsing around history and Greek and Roman civilization, I eventually settled on psychology. So I didn't really know much about it, but just when I went to the first lecture, I kind of thought, this is really interesting. I'll give it a go. So by the end of first year, I was absolutely hooked, and the English and music had taken a back seat. So apologies to any English music teachers maybe on the call, but psychology was definitely the subject that I wanted to pursue. So after a lot of difficulty, I have to say, getting into second year, pure psychology. So at the time in UCD, to transfer from first year into second year, you needed to be in the top 60 people out of about 500, I think. There's a lot of first year students. So didn't make it first time round and had to repeat the year, but eventually managed to get in. So really enjoyed my time in UCD, and was then thinking about what I wanted to do afterwards. So I was very interested in work and why people work and the types of careers people go into and so on. So I decided to do a master's in industrial psychology, which is really work and organizational psychology now. So went to the UK to do that. And I was really interested in people, I suppose, who maybe had a lot of difficulties or experienced a lot of barriers to getting into the type of career that they wanted to do. So I came home and started working in a community-based organization in a disadvantaged area of Dublin. So working with people who really did experience a lot of difficulties getting into work. So coming up with approaches and methods and different ways of working to support people to improve the quality of their lives. So worked at that for probably about 20 years, I'd say, 15, 20 years, and then decided to return to Maynooth to do a PhD, looking at the impact of unemployment on well-being. So, and here I am, I'm still here, about 6 or 7 years later. So I'm a lecturer in the Department of Adult and Community Education, training mainly adult guidance practitioners and adult guidance counsellors. So they're people who, many of you on the call, guidance counsellors, but often people working in as guidance practitioners in education, employment services, the prisons, in health, in housing, in a whole range of different areas. So that's my route into psychology, and I have to say it's been a very enjoyable journey so far. So I might just hand you over to Suzanne now to tell us a bit about her journey here.
Thanks, Nuala. I'm always very conscious when we do these events that you and I are very close contemporaries in UCD. So I'm Suzanne Gearan. I work with the School of Psychology here in UCD. Unlike Nuala, I identified fairly early on that I was very interested in psychology. I remember talking to Brother Kevin, who was my career guidance counsellor in Tala community, where I grew up and still live. In Tala, about a job that I'd seen in a novel where this person worked in a hospital as a clinical psychologist with children, and it looked fantastic. So that began my journey. Like Nuala, I came into UCD in the very first year that there was a quota on entry into what was called honours psychology. So again, you know, top X% of a large group of students all vying for this interesting subject, large lectures with the then Prof. Aidan Moore, and with students almost sitting around his feet. The lecture theatre was so full. And I remember feeling very intimidated that there was no way I was going to get in the top 70 places of this group of students, but I managed to do it, not anywhere near the top of that list, very much by the skin of my teeth. But for me, I suppose the journey was more about what aspect of psychology I thought I wanted to do. I'd come into psychology desperately wanting to be a clinical psychologist, as many people still do. But for my final year project, which is a piece of work that students will all do in their third or fourth year, their final year, I got my first taste of doing research, and I really, really liked the process, and decided to do a master's degree with the hope of getting onto a clinical training program, because even then, which is, you know, the guts of 25 plus years ago, it was very competitive. Started my master's, my MLit as it's called, and after a year didn't want to do clinical psychology anymore. Loved research, I was doing tutoring and demonstrating, as many psychology postgrads do, and was completely hooked on this brilliant combination of research and teaching and working with students. So stayed to do my PhD, and was very lucky that when I was finishing my PhD, a temporary job came up here in the School of Psychology. As for many, as I was then young academics, there was a lot of temporary contracts in the first few years, but I was lucky then to secure a permanent position in UCD. So I'm very proud to say that I've been in UCD since I was 17, and I'm nowhere near 17 anymore. But I've been lucky to have a wonderful, wonderful experience in this profession, meeting fantastic people, learning fantastic things, traveling, working on interesting projects, and I have never missed for a second not being a clinical psychologist. And in fact, I supervise and train clinical psychologists now in clinical research. So it's sort of come full circle, but in a way I wouldn't have expected. So I think that's a key thing I like to stress is we think we know what we want to do, but we don't necessarily know. So that's me. I'm going to pass you over to Clara now.
Hi everyone. My name is Clara, and I've had a much shorter career in psychology, up to this point. So I did my undergrad in psychology at the University of Edinburgh. That was a 4-year course, and what was really great about that was that in the first 2 years you had to take other subjects besides your major. And that was really great because I loved that diversity, but it also really affirmed that psychology was for me. So it was a really great experience. And I really loved doing that undergrad. I got really interested in kind of how the brain relates to behavior and to our thinking, and how our brain changes throughout the lifespan and how that impacts our thinking abilities throughout the lifespan as well. And I got really interested in research. Like Suzanne, I really enjoyed my research project that we did as part of the undergrad. We actually did two research projects as part of it, and so I was really keen to pursue that. So I think I'm one of the few people in psychology who were never interested in going down a clinical route and always interested in pursuing the research route. So yeah, I then moved on to UCD as well. So I moved over to Ireland to do my master's in behavioral neuroscience. That master's was brand new at the time, so we were the first cohort of people to take that in UCD, and that was brilliant for me because behavioral neuroscience is basically just a specialization in kind of that intersection of neuroscience and psychology, the brain and behavior and the mind and thinking. So that was brilliant for me, and I had a fantastic research project then as well, working with people with multiple sclerosis, and that was collaboration with Vincent's University Hospital. And I just loved that. And I loved working with my supervisors, and we decided that it might be worth a shot applying for PhD funding through the Irish Research Council. So I moved straight on to the PhD. So I'm now a PhD researcher funded by the Irish Research Council. So I've had quite a straightforward route. It didn't feel like it at the time, but in retrospect, one thing really smoothly led on from the other, which is, I guess, unusual. So I don't want to make it seem like that's the norm or needed. But yeah, I'll pass you back to Kennedy.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for sharing your initial stories, and you will have a chance to hear from two current students a little later on in the presentation. But now we'll just move along. So just a little bit about the PSI in terms of what we do in relation to schooling. So the PSI helps set the professional standards for psychology, whether that be code of ethics or guidelines for psychologists in different ways. And the really important thing that we want to highlight here is accreditation. So accreditation is essentially the process undertaken by the PSI to ensure that Irish psychology courses are suitable for preparing students to hoping to enter the field of psychology. So we want to highlight this so that you know that the course you are choosing is an accredited course for your undergrad. Therefore, you can progress within the fields into higher education if you wish so, or take any career path you want. But having an accredited course is really important, and Suzanne will talk about that a bit more later when it comes to choosing your path. So yeah, if you have any questions on the PSI as well, you can always email me. So now back over to Nuala to give us a little bit more detail in careers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kennedy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what psychology is, the types of careers in psychology, but also using psychology, what it means to be a good psychologist, and also the types of transferable skills that you'll develop in an undergraduate psychology program. And these are skills that are important not only in psychology, but in the labour market more generally, in terms of what employers are currently looking for. So I suppose just on the screen there, the kind of textbook definition of what psychology is, that psychologists use science and scientific principles to understand the human mind and human behaviour. We use this to develop, I suppose, knowledge to help people to improve the quality of their lives. So this could be through developing, change programs or interventions that help people to to make changes in their lives, but we also use this knowledge to help us to research and to better understand everyday lives and people's experiences of everyday life and their behaviour within that. It's a very multifaceted discipline. So psychology is kind of like an umbrella term. And within that, there are lots of subfields. So human development, social behaviour, cognitive processes, lots of different types of topics or themes that fall within psychology. It's a fairly new science, so it's only really been around for about 150 years and very much influenced by medicine and philosophy. So a new science, and we're learning all the time about human behavior. So it's, even though there's so much that we know from thousands of years ago, they were on it in terms of understanding human behavior at the time, but really as a discipline, this didn't really kind of start to formulate until the mid to late 1800s. So we'll move on maybe to the next slide there, Kennedy. So you might need to click a few times on this one. I think yeah, perfect. So as I mentioned, that psychology is kind of like an umbrella term, and within that there are lots of kind of sub areas, but I suppose leading on from that, then there's lots of different areas of psychology, and then hence lots of different types of psychologists. So you'll see them there, the colored blocks on the screen. So some of these you may be more familiar with. So for example, Suzanne mentioned clinical psychology. So that's probably the most well-known area of psychology. And generally, clinical psychologists work in healthcare settings. They might be part of a multidisciplinary team, and they offer treatment and clinical care to people who are experiencing psychological conditions and difficulties. And they work across the lifespan. So you'll often have clinical psychologists working with children, with adolescents, with adults. So yeah, probably the most well-known area, but also educational psychologists working in school and education settings. And they focus on learning, processing and retaining information, maybe working with students who are experiencing difficulties in school, both in terms of learning difficulties, but also often in terms of maybe behavioral or emotional difficulties. So you often hear on the news when there's been maybe a traumatic incident in an education setting, that psychologists are sent out from NEPS, the National Educational Psychological Services, to support the teachers and the school body. Academia and research and teaching is really the area that many of us, I think, on the call here on the panel work in. But I suppose the focus there is on asking questions, exploring concepts and ideas, and trying to constantly understand behavior and understand our experiences, particularly in the worlds that we're living in. So the world is in constant change, and hence there's constantly new questions arising for us. So a really vibrant and exciting area to be working in. Occupational, which is my area, my background. Often occupational psychologists work in business, but also in services that support people trying to access good jobs. So they focus on things like recruitment and selection, culture, teams, leadership, coaching often within the workplace. And counselling psychologists then work often in outpatient settings with people that are experiencing psychological difficulties, but often not to the same extent or to the same, I suppose, difficulty as people who would need to attend a clinical psychologist. So very similar types of training in clinical and counselling. And then neuropsychology is kind of a little bit of what Clara mentioned. So the relationship between the physical brain and our behaviour. And often psychologists who work in this area would work with people who have experienced maybe brain injury or some kind of illness that's impacted on the brain, and work around treatment and rehabilitation. Sports and exercise psychology, psychologists in this area work on enhancing performances. They often work with teams, elite sports people, but also often around issues where maybe someone's experienced an injury in their sporting life and how to deal with that. And then forensic psychology, which is, I think, the area that I really wanted to go into before I settled on work in organizational psychology. I was very influenced, obviously, by TV shows in the 90s, which had lots of famous forensic psychologists like Cracker and so on. So forensic psychologists kind of work in that space between law and psychology. So they often work with offenders and victims of crime. They look at the risk of reoffending and mental state and so on. And then health psychology is a kind of, I suppose, a newer and more kind of growing area of psychology, where psychologists work at that kind of space between people and their experience of health and their behavior and their everyday lives. But we see along the side there that there are also environmental psychologists, community and social psychologists, coaching psychology. In the UK, they have a psychological wellbeing practitioner role. And you often hear of aviation psychologists, consumer psychologists. So a huge range of different areas that psychology can be applied to, and practitioners then working in those areas to support people. Okay, Kennedy, I think we can move on. So, so what do you need to be a good psychologist? So I was trying to think about, a lot of what work and organizational psychologists do is that they look at personality and the type of environments where that personality can flourish. So the type of career environments where you can really use your kind of personality strengths to be successful in the job that you do. So as a psychologist, I was thinking about this, and really I think you need to be genuinely interested in helping people. I mean, as your core, of your being is to want to help in some way, but also to be able to have empathy with others. So particularly for people who are experiencing challenges in their lives, to try and put yourself in their shoes and to understand what they're saying. And part of that is being a good listener. So really using your active listening skills with no assumptions or prejudgments around that person's experiences. Have good observational skills, have patience. A lot of this work takes time, so you can't have a quick turnaround often. So it's having patience to support the person. Excellent interpersonal skills, be interested in solving problems, be trustworthy, and the client needs to see you as somebody who is trustworthy. However, the job can be quite demanding, that you're often working with clients who have severe problems and challenges in their lives. And you need to remain enthusiastic and hopeful in that space to support the person as best you can. So being able to bounce back and be resilient, be calm, and have a professional approach, and also be an ethical practitioner. So in terms of respecting clients' confidentiality and so on. So if that sounds like you, hopefully then you'll see psychology as a career that would suit you. And just in terms of then if psychology is not the career for you, there are many different career areas where an undergraduate in psychology can be really, really useful. So yeah, great, Kennedy, thank you. So we know that about 80% of undergraduates do not go into careers as a psychologist, but they go into other careers where they're using psychology. And this is just a small study from the UK, which showed that I think it's 62% of psychology graduates had gone into either full-time or part-time employment 15 months post-graduation. With lots of other areas, students moving on into further study or traveling. So psychology would seem to be an undergraduate career that definitely leads to employability, whether that's in psychology or not. And maybe the next slide then, Kennedy, and you can click again. Great, thank you. Just in terms of then the transferable skills that psychology students tend to develop during their time on undergraduate programs. You can see the range of transferable skills there. So transferable skills are really important for the labour market. They're the type of skills that you can take with you to many different jobs or many different roles. So they're kind of like the kind of generic skills that underlie the work that you do. So psychology students often develop critical reasoning and analytic skills. Often they must really develop these skills. These are really important. So to be able to kind of draw on information, gather data, and make some kind of analysis of it. And this is a skill that employers need more and more in lots of different areas. When you talk to employers, these are the types of skills they ask for. They rarely ask for a very, specific skill around psychology or, or a disciplinary type skill, but they're often these transferable skills. So communication, to be able to develop arguments, to be able to communicate and articulate what you're saying to others. For psychology in particular, being able to understand the kind of complex social situations that people come from, and that how behavior is often shaped, to really try and understand that and to question that is an important skill. But this is important in many areas of work. So even in terms of building relationships and negotiation skills and so on. And then planning and project management skills, teamwork, self-reflection, a really difficult thing to do. So it's one of the things that we try to train a lot of the practitioners on our courses here at Maynooth, the practice of self-reflection, to be able to take a moment after your day with clients or after a session with a client and think about yourself, not only what the client was saying, but how did that experience impact me, so that I can become a better practitioner. And then, of course, ethical awareness and resilience. So lots of transferable skills there that are really important, as I said, for many different jobs. So in social care, in health, in community work, the guards, in business, in the public service, HR leadership, and so on. So just so many areas where these skills are very useful. So hopefully that's given you a sense of kind of the career areas of psychology that you can envision for yourselves for the future. And I'll hand over now to Suzanne, who's going to tell you how to get there.
Thanks, Nuala. So conscious that there's a lot of information there in terms of the options and the opportunities, particularly with a degree in psychology, but conscious that for many people who come to the study of psychology, their interest is in that professional qualification. So I think a couple of key things to remember about the pathways and the expectations or requirements for training to work in or with psychology. We would be very clear that a professional psychologist has typically completed accredited specialist postgraduate training, and that's at either master's or level 9 or doctoral level 10. And different specialisms, depending on how long they've been in development, very much their history, will be at level 9 or level 10. So if you train in Ireland as an educational, clinical or counselling psychology, the vast majority of the routes are level 10 doctoral. But in areas like health psychology, work and organisational psychology, and others, it's at level 9. And that's not a reflection as to how hard or easy the work is. It's more a reflection of how established it is as a training route. But no matter what area of professional psychology you want to get into, you are expected to have an accredited undergraduate honours degree at level 8 on the National Framework of Qualifications. And that may be a single or a joint honours programme. And I'm going to come on to that because a lot of people assume that if a degree is psychology and that it's not an appropriate pathway. But the main thing is, as Kennedy touched on, an accredited honours undergraduate degree at level 8 or a conversion programme. And conversion programmes are really important because the nature of psychology, its applied relevance, its practical application, its accessibility means that a lot of people come to psychology later in their academic or professional careers. So conversion programs are routes for people who have a degree already, and what they're looking to do is transition into psychology. And these are often shorter programs, typically 1 or 2 years. They may be at higher diploma or master's level, and they are the equivalent of a level 8 degree in psychology. So they recognize all of the experience that you have from a previous level 8 degree, whatever subject that may be in, and then it aims to top that up with the specific requirements and expectations of a level 8 honours psychology degree. Now, Clara in a little bit is going to talk about what it's like to be on one of those level 8 or conversion programs. But before that, the question that a lot of people ask is, what are the routes into level 8 degree? So we're going to highlight some things that you all will know as guidance counsellors and potential students, but a few routes that you may not be aware of. So in terms of the typical routes to undergraduate programs, there are a range of psychology programs that are part of the CAO, and most students, I think it's fair to say, the vast majority of students coming into studying psychology at that level 8 level will come through the CAO. So as I said, we must make sure that it's an honours program, whether it's single or joint honours is fine, but you want to avoid programs where psychology is the minor subject. You want either a single or a joint honours where psychology is a major. We've mentioned the Qualifax website and the Careers Portal website, and there's multiple courses listed there with psychology in the title. But the key thing, and again, Kennedy mentioned it, is you really must be doing an accredited undergraduate program. And in Ireland, the current accreditation body and the historical accreditation body is the Psychological Society of Ireland. And as you can see, there are 36 undergraduate programs in 14 different institutions currently accredited. And there on the screen is the list of institutions that have accredited programs. They're sorted alphabetically, and they include both universities, technical universities, and other third level settings. And all of these have programs that have been assessed by PSI to meet the standards, the core standards of undergraduate training. Now, one of the big myths that people talk about is that you have to get 500 points to study psychology from CAO. And it's not a complete myth, but it is important to recognise that the popularity of psychology drives up those points. Because we've more students looking to get onto those programs than there are places, that demand drives the points level. I think everybody who's on this call from the PSI side of things will tell you, you do not need to be getting 500 points in your leaving cert to be studying psychology. And I, for one, wouldn't have gotten into psychology if that was the expectation or the requirement. So looking at those accredited programs, they're all either 3 or 4 years duration, and we get lots of questions about what's the difference, why is one 3 and one 4? They're institutional choices and decisions that are no reflection on, again, the quality of the program. As long as they are accredited as a first qualification in psychology, they are deemed by PSI to be equivalent. And I just want to highlight the range of points. EOS, some of you will be familiar with, is the end of season points for courses at the end of CAO 2023. And you'll see that at the end of that season of offers, the range of points was from 185 to 589. So there is a range of expectations in terms of leaving cert points. And again, that is driven by popularity and demand. And there were about 8 programs that had points over 500, and the average points were 435. So there is, again, this is a higher points area, but I really want to stress that that's a reflection of demand rather than the type of academic ability that you need to study psychology. One thing that does vary across these programs is the sort of subject requirements for CAO, and maths is typically a subject requirement, but at a very low level in terms of expectations. So as you can see, there's options right across the country in different types of academic institutions to do accredited programs. Now, the next slide actually might surprise you as well, because this is the list of accredited programs. And I think what, again, students may not be familiar with is the range of names that are on these programs. So a lot of them are BA or BSc, and you might say, well, is one more scientific than the other? No. Again, that will be due to sort of historic traditions in the institutions where the degrees are based. You'll see that there's a combination of single and joint honours. So you've got psychology with mathematics, you've got psychology with education, which is actually one of the most popular courses in the country, if CAO points is a measure of popularity, because as a four-year program, you graduate qualified as a teacher and with a first qualification in psychology. You'll also see reference to multiple conversion courses. They're those programs that are on, their name is a master's name, but it is a first qualification in psychology. And the other thing I want to mention is in terms of options, there's not a lot of clarity around full and part-time options, and that will often be specified at a local level in the institutions. But in terms of flexible options, the vast majority are face-to-face, but you'll see, for example, the BA in Humanities, which is a psychology major, and again, an accredited program, is an online course that's run through DCU. So you might look at many of these courses and have dismissed them as pathways into psychology, but these are all currently accredited programs recognised by the Psychological Society of Ireland as meeting that core expectation for undergraduates. So you might look at a program and think it's not relevant, but it is. So that's the one thing we want you thinking about. The next slide, I suppose, introduces the second thing that we want you thinking about, which is the different routes into undergraduate programs. And now more than ever, there is increasing variation in the options or the routes for students coming into psychology, depending on the institution that you go to. So, you know, everyone thinks about the typical CAO student who's probably 17 or 18, maybe 19. They're fresh out of the leaving cert, they've taken their exams, they've achieved their points, and they've come in through the typical CAO entry. So that is not the beginning and end of the story. These are all routes into undergraduate programs that you might be more or less familiar with. Mature students are a very established cohort within psychology programs, and I think almost all of the accredited programs will have mature students, designated mature students places. And as you can see, that's being 23 years or older on the 1st of January of the year of application. And for example, the BA in Humanities has a very specific focus on this group. A possibly less well-known and less common but growing route is students who are coming in through what's called the QQI or FET route. So these are students who, after their leaving cert, have gone on to do QQI qualifications. And through that pathway, what, you know, some of us would have called PLC route, they've gone and done a year at level 6, level 5, 6. And based on their performance in those qualifications, they compete for places coming into first year of the program. So these are students who've just had a little bit more time, a little bit more independent learning in the QQI course. And then the access or foundational route, the higher education access route are here, and the disability access route to education there. All recognise that access to education isn't equitable in Ireland, if anywhere, and that there are many students who experience additional challenges and disadvantages to their access to education. And access or foundational programmes support adults who may not have formal qualifications to prepare to study at university, and a small number of programs have routes into honours psychology from these programs. So the Trinity Access program is one of the most well-established routes. And then most psychology programs in large third level institutions will have dedicated spaces for students coming through the HERE and DARE routes. And in fact, in my experience and anecdotally, a lot of those places don't get filled. And then those places are then transferred back to those typical CAO students. So if you know of students who are interested in psychology and do come from different backgrounds with different skills and different experiences, it's really important that they recognise that there are routes into psychology that take account of those various backgrounds and the inequities that we can see and we know are experienced by students coming into third level. The last route I want to mention there is transfers. A lot of students will ask me about, you know, if I get into English and history in UCD, can I transfer into psychology? Most universities and third level institutions have the option to transfer both from outside the institution or from other courses within the institution. And as you've seen there, there's very clear criteria for what is involved. The one thing I will say is transfers are often based on two things. One, space in the program. So psychology has quite low dropout. So it's unusual that there might be additional places in second year due to dropout. And we can't really accept, most programs can't accept transfers unless there's space. And secondly, while you don't have to meet the points requirement of the course you're transferring into, you do have to meet a range of prerequisites that can sometimes be very challenging if you are up against students who've been doing a year of psychology elsewhere. So I just think it's really important that people are realistic about the routes that may come from this, from transfers over everything. I think the key thing, and Kenzie, if you click on, there's a little burst out there to remind us, you really have to gather the information about the programs and the routes into those programs, and Qualifax and careersportal.ie both provide really detailed information on the breakdown of places on these courses. And actually the next slide is just a screenshot from Qualifax showing the level of information that is available about, in this case, psychology at Maynooth, the route of application, the nature of the course, the leaving cert requirements, and then the places that are available for QQI and other access routes. So as they say, knowledge is power. Find out about those courses. And I think the next slide is simply a screenshot from Careers Portal to give you information about by comparison, the QQI places in psychology here in UCD. I'm very proud of the fact that we have one of the biggest intakes of students from QQI. It's more than, I think it's 11 or 12% of the first year intake come through this route. So that's a little bit about the qualifications and how you might find your way or work your way onto a first qualification in psychology at level 8. And I'm going to hand over now to Clara to give you a bit of a sense of, once you get there, what that's going to look like.
I will just answer one quick question that we received just about accessing DARE and HERE schemes. As you can see on the Qualifax here, here you can see on the right-hand side, the Higher Education Access Route and the DARE program. They have links to where you can check it out per each program, but the Irish University Association administers the programs. And you can find all information on their website, including what is eligible, how to get qualified and everything. But just because this is the slide right here, you can see it per each program as well on Qualifax. And now over to Clara.
Thanks so much, Kennedy and Suzanne. I'm delighted. I feel like I have the fun part. I get to talk about what you actually do as part of your undergrad degree in psychology, which is great. We've heard from Nuala earlier that there is such a range of career options after you study psychology, and that variety and diversity is reflected in your actual undergraduate course. So there's lots of areas of psychology that you will get a chance to experience, try out, even get a feel for the different areas and what you might want to specialize in. And you know, and your ideas might even change throughout that. So the one part of psychology, or the two that I'm most interested in, are listed at the top here, but that's a coincidence. So biological psychology is really about how the physical brain influences our behavior, how hormones can impact our behavior, our thinking, how drugs can do that. So it's really about the physical brain and the physical body, and as how it relates to the behavior in mind and thinking. Cognitive psychology is very much related. It's about how we remember, learn, think, perceive, and understand the world around us. And typically you wouldn't study cognitive psychology in total isolation from understanding how the brain functions as well. And that's actually common across all of these areas of psychology. They're all kind of interconnected to some extent. Developmental psychology is really about how we change throughout the lifespan. Often, undergrad courses in particular will have a focus here on childhood and adolescence, but really we develop throughout the entire lifespan, and that just doesn't stop when you turn 18. So it's across, you know, middle to older age as well. And there is lots of changes in our cognitive functions, in our emotional development. So this is a really exciting area as well. And of course, highly related to the physical brain, but also to our experience, and therefore all other areas of psychology as well. So social psychology is all about how we relate to one another, how we act in groups. I particularly really enjoyed learning about kind of conflicts and how one group might perceive another group, and in-group and out-group relations and all of that. I think it's a really fascinating area that I really enjoyed studying throughout my undergraduate degree. Yeah, the next area that you might that you will definitely hear about is conceptual and historical issues. So often when I tell people that I do psychology, I get asked about Freud and similar historical figures, and I always say, yes, you do learn about them, but typically when you learn about historical psychology and those aspects, so you get a good foundation of how theories developed and how we came to explain things the way we do now. The next area here is individual differences. And I think this is a really interesting area because a lot of psychology is about understanding how people behave, act, think on average. And this area is different. This is all about how we are different from one another, how we are different in our personalities, in our thinking abilities, in our mental and emotional states. So this is really, really identifying what makes us unique as individuals, and a really fascinating area as well. And then the last point here is on research methods, and we have multiple people on the panel here who are very keen on research methods and find this very exciting. I will highlight that I think this is the area that maybe is least expected. So research methods involves both qualitative methods as well as quantitative methods. And I think maybe quantitative methods aren't well known about enough. So that's really about having the skills, the statistical skills, to some extent the math skills, that are needed to kind of answer questions with data, empirical data, and collecting that data and designing studies that way. And I think Suzanne mentioned earlier that most courses will have some requirement for maths, even though it doesn't need to be at a particularly high level, but that's just to say that is a part of research methods, but nothing to be afraid of. I was never bad at maths, but I wouldn't have enjoyed it in school because I didn't see the application of it. And research methods I have very much enjoyed because it's so clear why you need them and why you need those skills. And these are also possibly arguably the most transferable skills you can get out of your degree, because they're so important, especially in this time. There's so much anti-science bias. It's great to know how to collect data, how to analyze it, and importantly how to interpret it. So that's a really important foundation. Yeah, and we might just move on to the next slide for an illustration there. So you will get a great foundation in all of these areas, and as you move on throughout your degree, you'll be able to specialize in what you're most passionate about and most interested in. And importantly, learning those research skills and getting that foundation will equip you with the skills that you'll need for your own individual research project, which typically happens in your final year. And as a preparation for that, most courses will offer labs and practicals, so you can kind of learn those research skills incrementally throughout your course as you develop the foundations and specializations as well. So I hope that was a clear enough overview, and I'm excited that we'll hear some student experiences now as well, who might elaborate on a few of these points as well. So I'll hand you back to Kennedy now.
Right, so now we have some very exciting guest speakers guest speaker, as one of our guest speakers is unfortunately stuck in traffic, but from our student affairs group, and I will let Rebecca introduce herself.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today to this webinar. My name is Rebecca, and I am currently the Early Graduate and Student Affairs Co-op member representative on the PSI Council. I've also co-chaired Student Affairs Group the last 2 years, and I suppose today I'm just here to share a little bit about my story, taking the, I suppose, non-traditional route to psychology. So I'll start back when I was in 5th year. I was doing really well in secondary school. I was getting 500, 550 points. I thought I was going to walk into Maynooth University after doing my Leaving Cert. And unfortunately, in 6th year, I just became really unwell. My mental health just took a massive turn, and I ended up having to pull out of school. So I couldn't attend anymore. And I thought at that point my whole psychology career was gone down the drain. I knew I wanted to study psychology, but I just didn't think there was any options for me. I did stay in contact with my guidance counsellor during that time, and they gave me the option to sit my Leaving Cert at the end of the year anyways, just try and pass it. But then told me about the DARE, the Disability Access Route to Education, and also different QQI level 5s that I could participate in. So I did go on and I qualified for DARE on the conditions that I had a diagnosis of epilepsy, which I still do. And that allowed me to enter into the CAO points race. But for example, if I went for Maynooth, and at the time, if Maynooth was 450 points and I had managed to get 400 points, I might have still gotten one of those places. So you do get a little bit of a reduced point scheme, but it does vary from course to course. I did not get anywhere near 400 points in the Leaving Cert after not going into school any day of 6th year. I did pass everything, which I don't know how I did that, but I did it. And I applied to the QQI level 5 in applied psychology in Blackrock Further Education Institute. I remember the day so clearly that the CAO offers came out that year, and I got no offers, and I was devastated. I was incredibly upset. But I decided, I was like, look, I've been offered my place in Blackrock. I'll give it a go, see if I like it, and we'll go from there. It was the best year of my life. My whole mindset changed around academia after having a really stressful couple of years in secondary school, not feeling like the Leaving Cert, I wasn't suited to the Leaving Cert, and I really struggled with that type of education, to then be going into an area of, a little bit more independent research, being able to set my own deadlines, still sat exams, but not to the extent or the stress that the Leaving Cert was putting on me at the time. I learned so much about myself, and it actually is the reason I'm now studying in the forensic psychology sector. Similar to Nuala, I grew up watching Law and Order, Special Victims Unit and Criminal Minds, thinking I was going to be the next Ice-T. I am now working and researching in the forensic psychology sector. Is absolutely nothing like Special Victims Unit or Criminal Minds. So just to put that out there, don't believe everything you see on TV. From after my QQI level 5, I ended up coming out with a first, which was, I couldn't believe it, because I had not done the Leaving Cert I wanted. My kind of, I suppose, confidence in myself was so low. So to get such good results, you know, at the next level, I was really, it was such a proud experience. And I always say to anybody just doing the Leaving Cert, consider the level 5, the PLC courses, because you learn so much. And the connections I made in that course, I still talk to now. So came out of that course anyways, and that year I was able to reapply to the CAO. I had the options to, I applied in as a QQI level 5 student, my CAO points from the previous year, and I also still had DARE, because you can reapply off your CAO and your DARE scheme for 2 years after doing your Leaving Cert. So I had done year 1, this was my second year. So I actually had 3 opportunities then to go through CAO. I ended up with 6 offers that year because I had applied to level 6 courses, level 7 courses, and level 8 courses. From going from 1 year made such a difference of getting absolutely no offers whatsoever to then going on and getting so many choices. It was real rewarding experience. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without my level 5 PLC. I ended up picking the South East Technological University, Waterford. I went there for 3 years. It's a Bachelor of Arts Honours and it's a level 8. So it was accredited by the PSI. And I loved every moment of that as well. It is one of the smaller courses. So I felt for me, with what I had gone through in 6th year, feeling overwhelmed, that smaller course really suited me and my nature as a person. From that point then, I was like, right, I want to get involved in absolutely everything psychology can offer me in this country. And that's when I learned about the PSI. I joined as a student member, started as an ordinary committee member on the student affairs group, and worked my way up to co-chair, and now up to my point where I am a co-opted member on the council. I found networking, getting involved with PSI, attending events just like this. I went to every single one of them, whether it was hosted by student affairs or early graduates, and just really got to know other people in the psychology community. And I'm sure everyone here that's talking today will tell you how interconnected everybody is in psychology. And it's a really lovely community of people in Ireland. Everybody knows everyone, and you can really build off your networks and connections. And it was my networks and connections that I learned that they had a Master of Science in Psychology and Wellbeing in Dublin City University. And I said, look, I'll apply for it and see if I get it. I got it. I'm now on that course now. I'm researching, as I said, in the forensic psychology sector. I had always wanted to go on to do practice, but similar to Suzanne, I now love research and I want to do a PhD instead. So I would say for anybody going into psychology, if and when you will study psychology, because you will, there's so many options now. Go in with an open mind, because you're open to so many different experiences. As Clara just showed, how many different types of psychology modules you'll take, and it will really pull you in so many different directions. I thought I was going to go in and become this clinical psychologist, and now I'm researching and working in forensic psychology, and wanting to continue on in research. So it's different for everybody, but just because you've had a tough time through your Leaving Cert or through 5th or 6th year, you know, as Clara said as well, you don't have to be the most intelligent when it comes to maths. I did ordinary level maths, I got an 05, and then I did 1st, 2nd, 3rd year statistics in my BA, and I got over 80 in every single one of those exams, because it's learning to apply it, and it's a different way of thinking. So there's options for everyone in psychology, and I'm such a firm believer in, if it is for you, it will not pass you. It might take you a little bit longer to get there, but you're meant to be there and you deserve your spot. So thanks for having me today. I'll pass over to Sinead now.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. You set that up very nicely for me with the if it's free, it won't pass you, because I had a very different journey to, I think, everyone else here. I've always been interested in psychology and always wanted to study it, but I have a chronic health problem, so I wasn't actually able to do in-person study. Going to a campus every day just, it wasn't for me. It wasn't something I could do. I need to be able to take breaks. I need to be able to manage, I suppose, my health needs. And then my daughter also has very similar issues, so I was a carer for her as well. So I had kind of said, this isn't something I'm going to be able to do. Pretty much given up. And then a friend of mine said, have you heard that DCU actually have an online psychology program and it's accredited by the PSI? And I was like, no, I've never heard that. So I looked into it, and Suzanne actually mentioned it earlier. It's the BA in Humanities Psychology major. And once you're over 23, it's open entry. So basically you apply, you pay your deposit, and you're in the program. From then on, obviously you have to get the grades to stay in the program, but you can apply and you're in. So I applied, I started that way. And because it's online and it's built around you managing and structuring it in the way that suits you, it meant I could manage my academic needs around my personal needs, and looking after my own health and my daughter, and the other things I have going on. So the BA in Humanities, the psychology major program, it's fully online. It's, as I said, it's accredited by the PSI, and it's been specifically designed for off-campus delivery, and developed over 40 years. So they really know what they're doing. They're very used to off-campus delivery and delivering everything online, and they do it in 3 different ways. So you have like self-study learning materials that you work on your own. There's also discussion forums where you will talk to other students, and then you have real-time classes where you're talking to tutors or academic staff. And the main difference is time. That whereas in most other undergraduate programs, there's the 3 to 4 years, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, with the BAPI program, the BA in Humanities, psychology major, you have up to 8 years to complete that. So if you can only do 2 modules a year for a while, and sometimes you can do 3 and sometimes you can do 1, that's fine. You do it in the way that suits you and that suits your lifestyle. So you have that little bit of extra time to work around what you need. I did, I think, 3 2 modules per year, because that's what worked around my lifestyle and my health needs. I know other people who have done it in a shorter time frame. You can't do it less than 4 years. But they really will work with you to make sure you do everything you need. So we've touched a lot on statistics, I think, myself and Clara and Rebecca. I was a little bit concerned about the statistics because it has been a long time since I did maths. I'm not going to say how long it's been, but it's been a while. But DCU give you so much support, and Bex will probably agree with that, with things like writing and maths. And also there's a lot of community support in the online education programs in DCU to help with building a community. But following on from what Bex said, if you do a psychology degree in whatever form, the student affairs group is brilliant. I joined the student affairs group as a student member in my first year, so that's 5 years ago now. And then over time, I was like, I want to run the committee. So last year I joined the events team, and this year I'm a social media officer, and Bex was my chair the whole time until now. So, having that community around you, as Rebecca has said, really helps to build your network and helps you to feel part of something. So even though online study, as I did it, can be quite lonely and you can feel a little bit left out and isolated, when you build those communities through the student affairs group, through your college, you have people and you build your network and you build friends and so on. So like I think a lot of other people here, I started my degree thinking I'm going to be a clinical psychologist, and following from what Suzanne and Clara and Bex have all said, or Rebecca, I fell in love with research in my final year project, and I'm now doing a PhD in online education because I feel online education has a lot to offer, particularly students with disabilities or people who have all these other things going on in their lives and need to be able to access things like psychology. So yeah, as Bex said, I'm going to finish with, if it's for you, it won't pass you, and it doesn't matter how old you are, there is a way in. And I'll pass you back to Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Sinead. That was such a great exploration of both of your experiences. And we really appreciate you taking the time today. Now I just want to transition over to questions. Again, if you have a question that you maybe don't have time to ask right now, feel free to email. Any of the panelists or other members of the committee can get back to you. I will just stop sharing the screen so we can have more of a conversation, and I will read out all of the question and answers. Okay, so the first question was asked a bit earlier that maybe Suzanne can speak to is our PSI or IACP, which is the Irish Association of Counseling and Psychotherapists, accredited courses typically required to study psychology at the undergraduate level, or is there a shift towards accepting QQI accredited courses as well / instead? And I think we've already kind of answered this, but Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, Kennedy, it's a good question. I mean, obviously QQI comes under the National Framework of Qualifications, and they would assess a range of programs. I think the key thing is PSI accredited programs have been judged by the profession to be appropriate for base qualification in psychology. I think national frameworks will look at broader educational relevance and standards and things like that. But I think in terms of a career in psychology and as a foundation, most postgraduate programs in psychology nationally and internationally will want a professionally accredited program. And that generally means that the national professional body or the state regulator have judged the programs as being suitable. So QQI is a really important benchmark of quality in further and higher education. But from a psychology perspective, the PSI currently is the only body in Ireland that is accrediting courses as meeting the standard for the profession, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much. And the next question which was about the conversion program. So if you get a MSc conversion program, you don't actually have to have a master's degree, ? Can you not get a PhD after that? How does that work?
Sorry, is that to me?
I think, sorry, yes, Suzanne.
Yes, that's okay. So look, it will vary from institution to institution. So depending on the institution, students can enter the PhD program either directly from an undergraduate or undergraduate equivalent, or some will require a postgraduate qualification, and that's for the PhD in research. For professional training programs at either, obviously if they're at master's level, their minimum requirement will be an undergraduate degree or equivalent for a conversion program. But I think it's fair to say that when you get into the doctoral training programs, so in Ireland, clinical counselling and educational psychology, there may be a statement that the minimum qualification is an undergraduate degree or equivalent. But in reality, it's very rare that students don't have a postgraduate qualification, typically in psychology. And the different courses score applications differently. In some, you get higher marks for a master's course in psychology than you would get for a master's course in a very aligned and cognate area like disability studies or research methods. So it's much more individual. But I would just distinguish between what's a minimum requirement and what's required to be competitive, particularly with high demand programs.
Thanks so much, Suzanne.
I might just, Kennedy, sorry, just come in there as well, just to follow on from what Suzanne said, in terms of, some of the areas of psychology. So for example, my area, which is work and organizational psychology, even if you do a conversion course, you'll still need to go on and do an accredited master's, a taught master's. So you're learning all of the skills to become a practitioner. And that's across a number of different courses in psychology at master's level, that's the requirement to actually go out and practice in the workplace. After you've completed the master's, there's normally then a two-year, approximately, maybe a bit longer, chartership process. So you would work in a work setting, but under the supervision of a psychologist, generally in your area. I would have had a number of work and organizational psychologists working with me, and we sign off on their practice over a 2-year process. And then they can apply to become a chartered psychologist. And that's really, I think, in terms of, the high standards that the PSI set for psychology in Ireland, making sure that the psychologist is a chartered psychologist in their particular area. So just to say that the route often doesn't stop. For all of us in psychology, it's a lifelong learning process. So every few years we have to submit our learning journals and so on to show that we're constantly upskilling in our area. So for anyone who likes learning, this is a great place to be. So thanks, Kennedy.
Amazing. I think we have covered this, but if anyone wants to add a little bit more just about how do you get in touch with DARE and are mature students included in DARE? If someone would like to.
I don't mind because I went through the application process. It was a couple of years ago now, so I don't know if there's updates on it. But for me, it was under the guidance of the school I was in. So in my secondary school, through a guidance counselor, they're there to support you. But also any guidance counselor, if you're a mature student, you would be able to go and access to them. Regards to whether it's for mature students or not, I believe it would be, because when I had DARE, so even though I got into SETU Waterford with my PLC course, my DARE was still on my application. So when I went for exams, I got an extra half hour for my exam, and I was also in a smaller room, so I wasn't in the big exam hall with everybody else. There are those accommodations there, but I believe as well, I know Waterford did anyways, you can also apply to the college to say, you know, that you have a disability, or for me, it was obviously mental health and then epilepsy. And you can apply to the college as well for extra supports. All the colleges have fantastic counselling supports, guidance supports, and there are people there to help. But definitely the Here and There website, and then if you're in school, go to your guidance counsellor, and if you're outside of school, any other guidance counsellor would also probably be informative on that area. But I imagine it will be because you do get those extra supports when you go into college at undergraduate level then.
Thanks so much. I have another question that maybe Nuala or Clara can speak to. Is there a large percentile difference between male and female students studying psychology? And are there any pros or cons involved for either or?
I'd be happy to answer that, and Nuala might want to jump in. So at undergraduate level, there's a majority of women studying psychology at undergraduate level. But that is not to say that we don't welcome other genders, quite the opposite. I think psychology is at its best when it's representative of society at large. And so, I think it's a fantastic subject to study, whether you are a man or a woman, or indeed identify with a different gender. So we try to be as inclusive as possible. And I think there's great advantages to having a representative student body at undergraduate level. But the current reality is that the majority of students are women. Nuala, would you want to add to that?
I think we spoke about this actually the other day, the kind of, majority of students at undergraduate level, it's like high numbers of female students, but as you go higher through your psychology studies, that definitely balances out and perhaps even goes the other direction. So yeah, I mean, part of what we're trying to do this year, and part of the reason that we have this seminar, is around widening participation in psychology. So we're trying to encourage and invite people who maybe don't feel that psychology is for them into the space, that there are so many routes and pathways. And as Clara said, really important that we represent the society that we serve. So yeah, and I don't think either way, I think it's really important to have that wide participation in psychology. So if we have lots of females studying psychology, and maybe then at the higher levels, lots of males maybe in those positions, it really does change maybe how services are delivered or how we understand the clients that we work with. So yeah, we're also widening participation.
Thanks so much for those answers. There's another question. I don't know who wished to answer, so anyone can jump on in. Can you still apply for clinical psychology if you have attended CAMS, emergency services, etc.? Suzanne, go ahead.
I will definitely take that one, and it builds on the points that have been made about psychology really looking at diversity and different perspectives within its profession, within its discipline. And there's absolutely no reason that any person with a disability or a chronic condition or even a temporary health difficulty can't apply for any course in psychology. I think with clinical and counselling psychology, there's huge training put into personal development. For trainees who are on clinical and counselling training programs, there's personal supervision. Many students will engage with personal therapy as part of that process. I think one of the challenges for anybody with any sort of condition or health issue, these programs can be very demanding. I think Sinead spoke really well about the benefits of flexible educational opportunities for people who have complex life circumstances, whether it be caring responsibilities or health. So I think when a lot of courses at that doctoral level are interviewing, absolutely they are not asking questions about people's mental health and well-being. Absolutely, I've seen students speak very eloquently about how their personal experience has given them an insight and an understanding, and in fact positions them very well to train as a professional psychologist. But I would definitely be highlighting for people that those doctoral training programs, particularly where they're funded, are very intense. You're working as a trainee psychologist. I think there's a challenge of being, for anyone, of being mentally and physically prepared for that level of training. One thing that is changing, though, is that as the age of individuals going into those programs is changing, more and more students on those courses are taking maternity leave. And it's a really interesting challenge because the universities struggle with their ability to support students on maternity leave in a way that's appropriate and in line with their statutory entitlements. So absolutely, you would not be prevented in any way at all. It can be a really important level of understanding and insight that you can have. I do come back to one thing that our very dear colleague who now deceased, Aidan Moran, used to say. You know, you should never come into psychology thinking that it's going to fix you. But I would add to it that definitely we can bring our interests and experiences into psychology and fix it. So that would be my perspective, having been involved in those programs.
Thank you so much. The next question says, as someone with a chronic illness, this is fantastic to hear. I'm assuming talking about Sinead's experience. Are there financial supports available for people who are receiving disability allowance?
I can answer that if you'd like.
Sure.
So for full-time courses, you can apply to SPPC, obviously, but you may have heard in the last budget, the government actually announced that part-time courses will now be covered for SPPC as well. So, and that's from this September coming. They haven't said exactly what the kind of stipulations for that will be, but I would hope that that will include something like that online education course. Also for disability allowance, the PhD stipend that Clara was talking about, the Irish Research Council, has in the last couple of years been changed that you can still apply for that while you're getting disability allowance. It used to be you would lose your disability allowance, but there was actually there was a bit of a fight put up by someone from DCU, and it was changed that now you can have both. So yes, there is funding available if you would like to pursue undergrad, doctorate, whatever, with disability allowance.
Thanks so much. So there's quite a few questions kind of all over the board here next. So I might just kind of take two of them that I feel are very generally applicable. Sorry, where did it go? Oh, essentially during supervision, are students paid for their work, as well as what is the internship employment situation after undergrad degree in psychology? Are there many opportunities directly regarding psychology? Do employment positions regard transferable skills more? This also links in with another question about what are average salaries. So this kind of focus on employment, wages, opportunities. Maybe anyone wish? Suzanne, for sure.
I don't mind starting off, and I'm sure Nuala may and others may jump in. So I suppose from a practical point of view, there are a number of courses that have formal internships, most notably DCU, which has a long-standing tradition of supporting students to secure internships, and the psychology program as DCU is very is very attractive because of that. There is a national expectation that where students are required to complete internships as part of their training, and that they should be paid for those roles. That's a relatively recent development, and it does vary significantly from place to place. Outside of programs that have a formal internship like the DCU and program and others, there is a very common practice in psychology of offering internship opportunities, particularly on research projects and things like that. And my experience is that unfortunately the majority of those are unpaid, and this is a big crunch area, because a challenge for psychology is if you offer opportunities to gain experience that require people to work for free, there will be inequity in who can access those and who can afford to take on those unpaid roles. It is something that's a real challenge. That's not to say that there's not a lot of fantastic opportunities that are unpaid, but that are carefully structured to ensure that students get good experiences. But it's definitely, there's not a consistent application of payment. The other thing I would just say, though, about intern opportunities for working with your degree in psychology, I think the challenge is, if you're coming out with your undergraduate equivalent, is that there are lots of students with masters, and I don't mean conversion masters, I mean a second qualification in psychology, and you may be competing with them for even very junior roles. For example, I say all the time, the one thing you are qualified to work in psychology with your undergraduate degree is as a research assistant. But again, you're competing with people who have their undergraduate and their masters, and they're looking for paid opportunities, and they just have that, step more skill and experience. So you can absolutely apply for junior, research assistant posts with a BA or a BSc or a conversion course in psychology. It's always going to be the competition that's the case. And the last thing I'll say is that the whole issue of internships, I think like opportunities for work experience are really important, but I would really encourage anyone looking at an opportunity they've been offered to weigh up the quality of the experience that they're going to get, the level of supervision, I've automatic, the level of supervision that they're going to get, and real clarity around ensuring that students are not working outside their competence in a way that could be challenging for them. And you can get those things in a very positive experience, but there unfortunately is no funding. But I do hope that we're able to move much closer to a situation where internships will be paid internships.
If you don't mind, I'll just jump in on that one as well really quickly. I understand when you do the level 8 and you want to go on to be, an assistant psychologist, and it is competitive. I am working in the social care industry, and I'm working with vulnerable populations. I'm working on a multidisciplinary team. So I'm still working with psychologists, psychotherapists. I'm getting experience, and it's a little bit of a different way, but it actually helped me get my place on my master's because I was still doing that on the ground experience work. So as everyone has reiterated earlier, psychology is everywhere, and you would be surprised in what sectors you can gain that experience with the populations you want to work with. But I think, as Suzanne said, it does get even the assistant psychologist positions are so scarce at the moment, and they're not as frequent anymore. So you do kind of have to get a little bit creative at the undergraduate level until you move into masters, or move beyond the masters.
Yeah, and I might just very quickly say, just for lots of areas that aren't kind of clinically focused, so in sports, in work and organizational, and even in educational to some extent, that often you don't see jobs that are called, I've rarely seen a work and organizational psychology job, to be honest. If I was in the UK, that would be a very different story, because there are very clearly defined career paths in that area, but not here in Ireland. So often for psychologists who aren't going down that clinical route, It's about finding the setting that you'd like to work in, the types of roles that maybe allow you to use your psychology or to work as a psychologist, but it won't be a kind of a specified career path. So just to keep that in mind, when I applied for my first job, I applied for a community development officer. I knew nothing about community development, but I knew I wanted to work in the community. And they just happened to be looking for a work and organizational psychologist. They had funding and hadn't advertised the role yet. So sometimes you find these roles in settings that you just mightn't expect to see them. So if it's an area or a company that you want to work in, I would apply and just see what the possible pathways might be for you as a psychologist.
Those are great points. There's a few questions. We'll try to go through them quickly. So one is just, would you know anything about the kind of requirements and things one can do to better oneself if there is an interview required for a conversion course? If anyone wants to jump on that one quickly, and then there's just a few other ones.
Maybe use the slide I put up about the transferable skills.
Yeah.
I would kind of try to be emphasizing that you've thought long and hard about converting from your previous undergraduate into the area of psychology, and that you've researched it, and that you feel that you are this person who has some of these transferable skills, but also, you know, obviously your interest in those areas that Clara mentioned, those types of subjects that you'd be studying in psychology, and where you can see why you want to do it. Where is it going to lead you? So having the kind of the vision that I want to be a psychologist in this particular area, and this is my pathway. This is the pathway that I feel will enable me to get there. I don't know, maybe someone else will have a...
No, I think that's a great point. I think you covered it perfectly. There's just a few more specific questions about masters. So one is, can I apply for clinical psychology jobs after a level 8 psychology degree, which is PSI accredited? Is master's required for every job in clinical psychology? I think we kind of talked about this a little bit with competing against other roles. But if anyone has anything to add.
I think the key thing is the HSE has very clear guidelines on the requirements for working as a clinical or counselling psychologist in the health system, which is where a lot of the jobs are, and that does require an accredited or recognised postgraduate qualification. It may be at master's, or it may be at doctoral level, but that's working as a clinical psychologist. But obviously working in clinically relevant jobs, as everybody has mentioned, there's very obvious named roles as assistant psychologist in the HSE, and that does require an undergraduate qualification as a minimum, but some experience. But to work as a clinical psychologist, you do need to have that accredited professional training.
Perfect, thank you. And the last one is, to do a master's, do you have to have a bachelor's degree in psychology specifically, or can you have a bachelor's in another degree without a conversion?
In my experience, Kennedy, it's unusual. A lot of psychology master's programs will require an honours degree in psychology as the base qualification. And there's a small number of programs that are in psychology departments, but maybe are more more less specialized. Clara mentioned the Masters in Behavioral Neuroscience here in UCD. There's two routes into that, one where you have a qualification in psychology and one where you have a qualification in neuroscience. But importantly, it's not a master's in psychology. It's a master's in a psychology department, but it's not a master's in psychology itself. So again, I think the expectation, and courses will be very clear. They'll say a minimum requirement is a degree in psychology, or they'll say psychology or a cognate discipline. So that will tell you where there's other routes in.
Thank you so much for that. The last question we just received is about doing an MSc in psychology in the UK, and is it transferable? This also highlights to a question that one of the attendees asked earlier that I answered through text, so I'll relay that here. So the PSI, you can become a member of the PSI if you didn't study psychology in Ireland, if you studied in a different country. There's a process. I have linked that in the chat. You can go to the PSI website, membership section, and then apply abroad. If you practice in Ireland, if you wish to be a psychologist in Ireland, or practice any form of psychology, be involved in Ireland. And with the BPS specifically, we do have a memorandum with them. So we work very closely with the BPS and BPS Northern Ireland as well. We're actually co-hosting an event with them soon, the All Ireland Careers event at UCD. Check out our website for more info. And so it would definitely be transferable as long as it meets the same standards as accredited courses meet with the PSI, which all info can be found on the website. And if you do have any questions specifically on that, there are links on the website in terms of who you can email in the PSI if you go to contact. But yes, so we do have a lot of international members. I think that is it for all the questions in the chat. Thank you all for your fantastic participation. Really appreciate it. This recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and I will send it all out to every participant after later this week. So if anyone else would like to share some closing thoughts, and yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks. I'm the current chair of the Science and Public Policy Committee. And I'm just really delighted that we had this webinar, and I know it's gone way over time, but like great to have the questions and the input. So really just thank Rebecca and Sinead. We're really delighted to be able to hear about your experiences. It's so important that we share our career stories with others, so that people who are thinking about this career know that we didn't all have this really linear pathway. And most people don't into their careers. So I'm really delighted, and thank you to Kennedy for chairing the session and for organising everything in the background, and for Suzanne's constant motivation of SPPC, I have to say, in the background. So thanks, Suzanne. So I'll leave it there if anyone else would like to say anything, but thank you all for attending. It's been really great.
Right, I will stop the recording.